All right, so we are here with Mothers Illuminated, and I'm Michelle McCartney at the Co-work of Londonderry. If you're a mom looking for a great place to get some work done away from the house and your crazy kids, definitely look at the Co-work of Londonderry at londonderry.cowork.com, and Co-work is spelled COWERC. They have office space, conference rooms, workshops for business owners, a podcast room, lots of great benefits for members. And today I am here with Darlene Pawlik. She's a little bit of like a local celebrity around here. Everybody knows who you are, Darlene.
I don't know about that.
And so we're going to talk about quite a few different things here. I know you're an advocate for pro-life, and you're a speaker on sex trafficking. So I was hoping you could kind of tell some of your background and why those are subjects that you talk about.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here. I always wanted to be a mom since I was really little. I used to line my dolls up on the bed before I left the house to go to school. So I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super important, you know, as a mom, there's so many different things that you have to think about. It's like, I've always wanted to be a mom as well, even when I was a kid. I remember I'd have all my stuffed animals and I'd have them like set up as families because that was just the most important thing to me, you know? So yeah, I think being a mom is like the biggest blessing, and there's so many things to look at. And, you know, especially recently, there's been a lot of stuff in the spotlight about, you know, human trafficking. I know like the whole Epstein thing just, you know, came out a couple of years ago, and, you know, there's been a lot of that kind of interest where people are saying this is really coming to the table now. So I think this is a very relevant topic.
Yeah. So I start my story before the beginning. My mom was 15 years old when she was raped by a boy at school. And it wasn't at school, but he was new at the school. And she hid that from everyone. She didn't tell anyone what happened. She went up to her room. And then when she found out she was pregnant with me, she said, well, we were in it together. She saw me as a person even before anyone ever knew that I existed. And that resonated with me as a young child. I learned about that far too young, I would say. I was pretty young, but she married him. She, I guess, thought he was going to change. He apologized and said that he was going to, be better, but he wasn't. He attacked her every time until she was pregnant again. And on the verge of suicide, she called her mom and said, "If you don't get me out of here, I'm going to kill myself." And boy, I can't even imagine the hellish life she was living according to what she was talking about. So she put me on her hip like a sack of potatoes, and she went to live with her mom. And she did marry again. And at that point, I had a pretty normal kind of step-parent relationship. And we had cousins, and we played games, and we went to school. And yet, for reasons I'll never fully understand, she sent us back to my paternal grandmother's house, knowing that he was a violent, horrible person. But apparently she just thought that he couldn't possibly do that to children. And he had access to me and to my sister. And my grandmother and my aunt were both complicit in his abuses. So it was at her home that he would abuse women and children. And I say that because, that's what happened, but I really want people to understand that when we talk about child abuse and child sexual abuse in particular, a lot of people think it's like this weird old guy at the park, or something like that. And it's really not. I generally, when I talk about child sexual abuse particularly, I bring a spider with me. I have a big spider, because predators that prey on children are like that spider. They hang around at the edges, and they meticulously build their web slowly over time, but not right in your face. It's kind of on the side, and they take a long time at that. And I think people expect it to be this ominous, weird-looking person when it's usually not at all. It's usually someone known to the child who has been able to weave a relationship in with the family. And they will come alongside the family and maybe babysit or, buy stuff for the family or for the children. If it's outside of the family, it could be a family member. And it's men or women, mostly men, but there are women too. And so it's really important to kind of think about all of the people in your life when we're thinking about child sexual abuse. This went on for a lot of years. When I was at my stepfather's house, as I said, it was a normal kind of place to be, but at my grandmother's house, it was very abnormal.
Yeah.
She taught us from very, very small how to keep secrets. If you take this lollipop and you go in the corner and you have your lollipop and you don't tell anyone, you can have another one. And so it was a very creepy, insidious thing that was going on. So another thing to think about with your small children, really small children, is always keeping a dialogue with them about what happens at the babysitter's house and how things go, and make sure that you keep that open communication with them at all times. As I grew and it was very violent. It was very terrifying, but I was taught, as I said, very young, how to be silent.
Yeah.
So as I grew, I learned how to try to be invisible, kind of hide behind furniture and be the silent one. My mom called my sister and I, shut up and sit down. My sister was the opposite of me. She acted out. So she spilled everything and fell into every room and off every chair and made all kinds of noise. And I was the silent, kind of fly on the wall. And so obviously she was shut up and I would sit down. And my mom divorced a second time. She moved to a small tenement in Haverhill, Massachusetts. It's a mill city with all those, 3-story, one after another. They were so close together I could literally touch them standing between them, And she couldn't make the rent all the time, so she had people come and stay. And my grandmother would stay for a couple months, and then her friend would come and stay for a couple months. And various uncles, my mother had 2 brothers, and they would stay for a couple months. And so when I was 13, one of my uncles molested me. And that's when my world spun completely out of control because I had no safe place anymore. When I was at my stepfather's house, it was a safe, normal kind of place to be. My grandma's house, obviously, as I said, it wasn't. And I was old enough to stop going there as much, but now I had no safe place. So I was raging and doing drugs and alcohol with the neighborhood kids and just really having a really bad time with truancy, etc. And I had a child in need of services in New Hampshire and Massachusetts and other places. They may call that a CHINS. And so it means I saw a social worker. And the social worker said that my mother and I were jealous of each other, and that was the root of our problems. So, obviously, not quite. So I was acting out of a tremendous amount of trauma. As I said, it was quite violent. And then with the uncle and all of that.
And at this time, your mother didn't know about any of that?
She knew nothing. And I was not really able to tell her. The fear and the silence that I was instructed to keep was very deep and really strong. And so I didn't say anything. But one day, and many days, out in the neighborhood, this really, what I thought was a handsome man at the time. I don't know if I would think he was handsome now, but he was a big guy, about maybe close to 6 feet tall, but it was the muscles. He was a bodybuilder from the YMCA, and he had jet black hair, and it was all wavy and just sparkly. Everything about him sparkled. He had bright white teeth and jet black hair, and he drove a black Lincoln Continental with red leather interior, and it was always pristine, And he came to my neighborhood often,
Mm.
and he was very friendly with all of the kids, jovial, and had a good time with everyone. You know, what's the newest game you're playing? What are you watching on TV? Did you like this new MTV video? Because we had MTV in those days, was just starting out. And it never occurred to me that I was his target.
Mm.
I was 13 in the spring of my 13 year. It was a couple months. I'd been 13. It was New England, Haverhill, Massachusetts, so it's northern Massachusetts, and cold. And so when the weather turned cold, it wasn't too long before I was in his car talking with him. Sometimes there'd be other kids there. So as I said, it was very, very subtle. And it was months, slowly over time. Again, like that spider.
Building the trust. And they call it grooming, right?
Yeah. And he'd like make innuendo or talk to me about having sex, etc. for a few months, and then it wasn't too long after that I was in his bed. And that was just kind of the way it was. A lot of my friends were having sex with just their friends. It was a thing that we did, drugs and alcohol. It was a different kind of lifestyle. Very common today, but it wasn't quite as common then, I don't think, although we were told it was, in our groups. But and then he'd start saying things like, "Oh, why don't you have gloves? Why don't you have boots? And I could get those things for you if you want to have sex with my friends, for a little money." And I said, "I don't need to do that. I don't. That's not something I want to do." But I still was with him, and it was about 9 or 10 months, and on my birthday, on my 14th birthday, my mom came home from running some errands, and I said, "Well, it's my birthday."
Yeah.
And at this point, usually when I'm doing my speaking, whether I'm talking about trafficking or I'm talking about pro-life, I want to remind people this was the time when I really realized that, we don't have unconditional love here on earth from people. Because all of the anger, all of the rage, all of the running away, it wasn't really running away at that time, but staying out, truancy, etc., that I had been putting my mom through in those days was fresh in her mind. She was angry, and rightly so. Not that she was dealing with it appropriately, but she didn't know how to deal with it. She didn't know what was going on. She did bring in help. As I said, I was truant, and there was a social worker, etc. But in that time, I was in the present moment. That wasn't thinking about all of that. It was my birthday. And I just thought I was going to have a birthday something. And because it wasn't anything in her mind, she took 2 crumpled up dollar bills out of her purse, and she threw them on the table, and she said, "Here," as she walked past me. And I was devastated. I was really devastated. And that man had given me his phone number, and he'd never asked for mine. And so I called him that day, and he sold me that very day. Now, my birthday is in the middle of January. And that particular day, it was slush and overcast, and it was the 80s, the early 80s. And so everything was gray, broken windows, broken down. It was just everything was just gray. And I stood outside, and the slush was about 3 inches deep. It was coming over my shoes, and my sneakers were getting filled with water. And I stood there, and I looked in a 3-way intersection. I said, I wonder if anybody can see me. I wonder if anybody actually sees me. And there was a drugstore behind me with the lights, but everything in front of me was just this bleak gray. And then he came sloshing around the corner, and I got in the car, and I don't remember saying anything. I don't remember what was on the radio. I remember staring at the radio, so I know it was on. But when I got to his apartment, he sold me to a man from New Hampshire, a small businessman from southern New Hampshire. And he was so excited because I was so awkward and so young. I'm not very big a person now, but I was quite small then. I was about 90 pounds.
Wow.
So a little girl, and he was so excited. and he had his assistant watching, and so that made it even more awkward for me.
Yeah.
And I was, I remember taking off my cold sock. It was stuck to my foot, and I kind of lost my balance, and he giggled. And I'll never forget that. And that is probably the biggest instigator for my speaking about trafficking in public, is so that other little girls aren't feeling that, that being...
Yuck. That's all I think of when I hear it. Yuck.
Yeah. It was awful.
Yeah.
And Ace sold me lots more times, and then he sold me to another pimp who was quite violent. He choked me out if I didn't behave. And he pushed my head down one time on the floor and used his leg to choke me with, and my head was being pushed into Ace's boots. We were in the back of his car. And so I had boots in my face and his leg against my neck. And when I passed out, he lifted me up and shook me. And then he took me out of the car because he thought, by this time I'm going to obey. And he handed me his clothes on hangers, like I was just going to, bring him upstairs for him.
Yeah.
And I tossed him back at him, and I ran hard as I could. And I actually got the handle of a car of someone who was driving. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning or something. And he looked terrified because this big black man was running up behind me.
Wow.
And, he made me let go of the car. But there was a lot of things like that, a lot of violence. I was gang raped at a school one time, in a college. This guy that I thought was my friend, I thought we were just going to go smoke some pot and watch some TV. We got there, and I was sitting on the floor with my hand out behind me, and he kneeled on the back of my hand. And the paint shot right up my arm. It was so painful. And he said, "You be quiet, and you're going to go in the other room." And I said, "No, I'm not." And he put more weight on my hand. And I realized that I didn't have any choice. The 2 guys that were sitting on the couch were not my friends, obviously.
Yeah.
And just one after another, and there were 2 guys holding my legs, and just over and over. And this one guy came in, and I caught his eyes, and he didn't want to see my face. He didn't want to know there was a real person there. Yeah. He covered my face with a pillow, and I thought, this is it. That's it. I'm not going to make it out of this room. But the man who'd brought me there pulled the pillow aside, pulled my face over, and said, "You're gonna stay here, and you're gonna keep looking at me." And they went on and on and on. And when he brought me out of that, he put me in a car, and I woke up in the heat of the day in the car, just drenched with sweat, and I just kind of walked down the street, and there was a woman sweeping off the mat in her front. I have no idea what I looked like, but it must have been bad. Must have been bad. And I just thought, wow, I am that doormat, and she's just sweeping off. But then I was sold to one man as a house pet, and I call it house pet because he put me in an apartment. It was in the name of a sheriff in the town. So this man I thought was really connected. I thought, there's no getting away from this guy. He's connected to police. He had brought me to detectives' homes before. He ran the illegal gambling where I had been first sold in the back alleys out of a car. And this was 3.5 years later, so this was a long time into it. And I thought, no more rapes, no more beatings. This guy likes me as a person. We have fun together, kind of, And he put me in this apartment, and I got a kitten. I had pots and pans. I didn't know how to use them, but I had them. And he told me if I got pregnant, I would have to have an abortion. He told me about the abortions that he had forced other girls to have. One of them was 16 weeks pregnant, and she had delivered in his store, in the bathroom in his store, in the toilet, a dead baby. And so I knew, but I had been passed around for 5 years by that time. I just thought, not going to get pregnant. But I did. And I think he knew it, before I went to the doctor. But he asked me if I'd made the appointment for the abortion, and I said no. I threw myself at his feet. I mean, like on my knees, begging. I'm the best at secrets. I'm really, really good. Yeah. I still hadn't told anybody about the abuse from my childhood at that point. Nothing. And he said, no, there's the phone. So I called the abortion clinic, the Planned Parenthood, and I made the appointment. And somehow, through my wails that night, I fell asleep. And that's another thing, when I'm talking to people about trafficking, I was crying and crying and crying in that little apartment, and nobody knocked on the door to see if I was okay. I can't imagine that nobody heard me. So nobody saw me and nobody heard me. Yeah. Yeah. It's a little tough to take. Yeah. But it is a crime that is right in view of everyone, but it's happening in plain sight without anyone knowing it. Yeah. Trafficking, that is. And I fell asleep and I had a dream. And I dreamt of the abortion procedure in living color from the perspective of the womb. So I saw half a face, those little stubby fingers, a little bit of a rib cage. And I woke up terrified, terribly upset. And I threw my hands in the air, and I noticed that my hands were in the air. I didn't know that was a real thing, but it's a real thing. I literally found my hands in the air, and I said, God, if you're real, I need you to show up. Yeah. And then I remembered one social worker who had been my key tracker. She was kind to me. Now, at that point, I was just about 18 years old. Might have been a few days before, a few days after. But this woman was the only person that I can remember that didn't have an angle. I mean, that was her job. Yeah. But everybody else seemed to be only kind to me because it was their job. Yeah. This lady seemed to be kind to me even though it was her job. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I called, and she wasn't working there anymore. The woman on the phone was like, she doesn't work here anymore. But she could obviously hear the panic, I guess, in my voice. Yeah. And she said, hold on, let me see if I can get her. And she found her. And she called me back. Anthony called me back, and we met together and devised a plan. And she found a home for unwed mothers for me, and it wasn't really even a home. It was just this woman's house who decided, I have 2 rooms in the basement that are finished. Let me see, if anybody needs them. And I needed them. Yeah. Myself and a couple of other girls in very similar circumstances. Not necessarily trafficking, but unwed mothers. Young. One of them was only 14. She was on her, she had had 2 abortions, and the doctor showed her the second abortion and said, see what you did. Which always struck me as very strange. Yeah. He's the one who did that. She was a child. Yeah. She was a kid. Yeah. Right?
How do you do something like that? And, I mean, he's the one that performed the procedure. If he really had a problem with it, he wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, but it was her second, and he apparently didn't want to do it again. Wow. So he showed it to her. And of course, that was very traumatizing.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, so I hid there with the baby. We were supposed to go out to dinner that night. So I pretended to go have an abortion. We were to meet that evening, and he came to the door, and he didn't even take off his coat. He just said, "You ready?" So I just grabbed my coat, and I didn't know at that point if he'd seen me, if he had me followed, or because in my mind, I mean, he was small-time mafia. He was connected with the Dons in Boston, and we used to go down to Boston all the time to the restaurants down there, and he was always seeing these, men in suits and stuff. And so I thought he was so connected. Yeah. I didn't know if I was going to make it out, if that was it, if I was going to be killed, if he was going to, because he told me if I didn't have an abortion, he was going to give me one or he would kill me, one or the other. I wasn't getting away with that. I want no life, he said as he slammed the arm of the couch. And I went with him that night, and I just kept shifting my weight and moving around, and I took the big red painkillers he gave me, and I went in the bathroom, and I said, God, I hope this doesn't hurt the baby, because I was not going to do that. I was willing to die. I couldn't do that. And I know, people who have been very traumatized by having abortions, before, during, and after, the whole forced abortions and not. But it's a very common thing to have forced abortions in trafficking. Anyway, he brought me back to the apartment, and I still didn't know for sure if he was going to have me killed. I didn't know if he knew. But he said, if I'm going to let you go, and if you come back to the city, you're mine. So he let me go. And I think the reason he let me go is because he had told me about the other forced abortions, and that their relationship was no longer compliant. He wanted a compliant person that he could use when he wants to use them and not when he didn't, and there was no question. There was going to be no animosity, no fighting, none of that.
He wanted something easy.
Yeah. So I think that's why he let me go. But that experience of having my baby and having pro-lifers, the first time I ever knew that people were genuinely kind. Like, this woman gave of herself, both the social worker and the woman who opened her home to me, without expecting anything in return. There wasn't any expectation. There wasn't any need for them to do that. A lot of times I like to raise money for organizations that are pro-life or anti-trafficking. And a lot of times I'll say, I didn't know people like you existed.
Oh, yeah.
People who would give of themselves, their money, their resources, their time, their energy.
Yeah.
I didn't know that they existed until I was 18 years old.
Wow.
That's a pretty rough assessment of society, but but that was my life. And so I ended up having that baby, and I went to nursing school, and I graduated from nursing school, and on graduation night I met up with an old boyfriend, and I hadn't been with anybody for a long time, but that one time I got pregnant again. So I had 2 babies. And I had met my husband just after my first baby was born. And that's a whole story. It's a really fun one for some other time. But he was terrific, just really friendly and everything. But he didn't want a person 7 years younger on welfare with a baby. That wasn't his idea of fun. So we were on again, off again a little bit. And then when I was pregnant with the second time, with my second daughter, he said, why don't you marry me? Like, he was willing to marry me. And I said no, because I thought it was pity, you know, and I still didn't really trust men in particular. And then later on, I was big waddling around. I gained about 65 pounds with my pregnancy. And he said, why don't you marry me? And I said no. And then right after the baby was born, he asked me again. And I said no again. And that was it for him. He wasn't going to ask me, which I didn't know until I asked him. Baby was a couple months old, and we were at McDonald's, and my toddler was running around with the birds, because we were outside at a place at McDonald's, and I said, why don't you marry me? And he said, okay. So at that point I had been needing a place to rent, and so I rented an apartment of his, and we got married not too long after that. And so we've been married 31 years in a couple of months, and we have, he adopted my 2 girls, and so we have 5 children and 4 grandchildren at this point. And so I do a lot of speaking. I've been speaking for pro-life for, I think about since 1992, 1993 was the first time I started speaking. So a long time, and that's what got me into the pro-life movement, obviously, the forced abortion, and the fact that my mom recognized me as a person before anyone knew I was even alive, that I was in existence. And those things really stuck with me. And so that's why I speak about pro-life issues, and I wrote a little an article for Dignity, which is a publication out of Rhode Island, why this trafficking victim is pro-life, you know, because a lot of trafficking advocates are not pro-life. They think abortion's going to set the woman free from their child that was conceived out of violence. It was a lot of years of sexual violence, but my baby was still a baby. And as far as I was concerned, she was still a little person that needed my protection. We as moms are the only ones that can protect our children at first. There's no one else that can protect that baby. Isn't that a heavy thought?
And I'd even take it a step further and say that for most of their life, nobody's going to care about that child's well-being as much as their parents will. And so I think that that's a huge thing, you know, when you talk about different levels of freedom, you know, for parental choices, you know, and you talk about like medical freedom and, you know, all these different levels of parents being able to raise their children the way that they want to. There's a lot of people out there who want government to kind of step in. And in reality, like, who's going to care about that child's well-being more than their parent in most cases?
In most cases, yeah. And so that's what got me started speaking in pro-life. And I didn't actually tell anybody about my trafficking experience until I was almost 40.
So what got you to the point where you felt like you wanted to share that?
So my friend was going over to India, and she was working with trafficking victims over there, and I was supporting her in her ministry, and she had a conference, Hands That Heal, or I think it's called Hands That Heal, or Healing Hands, I can't remember now, oh my goodness. It was, I think it was maybe 2012. And the woman on the stage was telling my story, basically. She was talking about domestic child sex trafficking and what it is. And the majority of domestic child sex trafficking victims were sexually abused as children, generally by a family member, a close relative, or a close family friend. As I was saying at the beginning of this podcast, it's usually somebody who's been able to come in, develop a relationship, and then, start to talk with the child about, our secret relationship, or you're so special, or, those kinds of things, maybe buying gifts, or some way of keeping that child quiet, maybe even straight up money happens sometimes. I was actually listening to a man who, he said at 8 years old, he was sexually abused, and they gave him money to keep his mouth shut. Well, that's child sex trafficking. And he's still not even aware of it, because it was a podcast I was listening to online, and he didn't even know that. And so I think we have a misconception about trafficking. We don't know what trafficking is in the United States, but really it's anything in exchange for commercial sex with anyone under 18. Or if the person is over 18, then it's by force, fraud, or coercion. And then you have to think about, what does that mean? Force is obvious. But it could be a little bit tricky, because what's causing the force? So I know of one woman whose child was abducted, and the force was they were holding the child. It was not violence to her person, but there was fear for her child. So that's force. And then fraud, we have advertisements on Craigslist, modeling agency, come, those kinds of things. We'll make you a star, and all those kinds of, that's fraud. That's going to be fraud. And then coercion is going to be one of those fine lines too, is could you put coercion in the camp of they have the child? Is that force or is that coercion? It could be either. But to coerce somebody sometimes is just, oh, you're my boyfriend, I love you. Oh, well, if you really love me, then you'll help me pay these bills. Well, how would I do that? I don't have the skill. Well, I have these associates. If you have sex with these associates, then you can help me pay my bills. And so that woman is being coerced by her boyfriend,
Yeah.
right? And then it could be the other way around. It could be a woman who says, hey, I helped you get an apartment. I helped you buy your clothing. I helped you with all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Now you need to do this.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's another form of coercion, which isn't necessarily force, because they aren't beating on them.
Yeah.
Force is usually
violent.
Part of it, though. Yeah, there's a dynamic of that. And one of the things that happens right now across the country is that there are people saying, well, we need to decriminalize prostitution.
Mm.
There's only 10 counties in Nevada that have either decriminalization or legalizing of abortion, which is different.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Legalizing means the state's the pimp. There's
Yeah.
taxes and regulations, and there's standards or protocols that you have to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Decriminalization is kind of like the Wild West. It's like, hands off, police, there's no crime here.
Yeah.
So if you decriminalize prostitution, then the police don't even have the right to walk up to someone and say, how old are you?
Wow.
They don't have that ability to investigate because it's decriminalized.
Mm.
Yeah, very scary stuff, right?
So obviously in that situation the prostitution is decriminalized, but if they suspected that somebody was underage, could they investigate then?
Well, that's a tricky thing because if they're approaching that girl, boy, and they just tell them they're 18, it's hands off. Do they have the right? We call that illegal search and seizure, don't we?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
So
gets tricky. Yeah.
It gets very tricky. It depends on whether or not that young person wants to divulge whether or not they're 18 or, give them their ID. If that police officer has the right connection and builds a rapport, then great. But if they come off as being intrusive and the young person just decides, I'm not going to give you any information, it could be that they don't get any information.
Yeah.
So it's very scary stuff. And there are people who are pro-prostitution, and there are people who have testified, for example, at our state house, that they are prostitutes and that's what they want to do. But what I have to say about that is that there's just a thin, fragile veil between prostitution and trafficking.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of things that could pierce that veil. It could be one more, and I say more, violent encounter with a buyer. Buyers are often violent.
Yeah.
Often. It could be one more sexually transmitted infection, one more bad diagnosis. It could be one more just negative interaction, even if it's just verbal.
Yeah.
Just one more degrading comment, right? That just pierces that veil. And it could be even that they see somebody in a different position, a different lifestyle, such as yourself, home, married with 2 kids, living a totally different lifestyle. Like, I want that.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that veil could be pierced in all of those ways and more.
Oh, yeah.
Ways I can't even think of, I'm sure. And so I don't think that decriminalizing prostitution is ever going to be an answer to the problem of violence in prostitution. Violence is inherent in prostitution, regardless of whether or not it's legal or illegal. It's just part of what it is. And so when we look at those kinds of bills, for example, there's bills up at the State House. There's one up there this year to exempt a person being prostituted from prosecution if they report violence. So if they were raped, male or female, that's why I say they won't be prosecuted for prostitution. That kind of a law, yes, of course. And I'm not saying I want to lock up anyone who's being prostituted either. Or whether they're doing it of their own volition or not. I don't think that the sellers of sex are the ones, because usually it's a matter of this. Sometimes it's what they want to do for the moment, I realize, but a lot of times it's survival. And it's a feeling of I felt worthless. You know, when you grow up as a child being sexually abused, I've done a lot of research in brain chemistry and brain development. What happens is, well, you have, say this is your brain, right?
Yeah.
So way inside your brain, right
Mhm.
here, you have this little tiny thing, it's about the size of my fingernail,
Mhm.
called the amygdala, right?
Mhm.
That's where we process the emotions of the things that are going on around us. And then around that, right over that, is the hippocampus.
Mhm.
And that's kind of like a relay station.
Yeah.
And it helps us go from our emotions
Mhm.
up into our executive reasoning. Well, a child doesn't have the connections for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't have that executive reasoning developed. But not only that, a child of sexual abuse, repeated, ongoing sexual abuse, has a brain that's had that that hippocampus actually shrink back.
Wow. Yeah.
So the physical connections are harder to make. So as a teenager growing up from child sexual abuse, that teenager feels the rage and the trauma and the triggers and all of that stuff, but the ability to articulate that and the ability to process what are the repercussions and the consequences of my behaviors as I'm acting out of this emotion aren't developed the same way.
Yeah.
They're not as able to process those things as a child who grew up in a loving, stable environment.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever done a show on ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences.
No.
So ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences. There's a list of 10 of them in 3 categories. One is abuse, so mental, physical, and sexual, and one is neglect, and then the other one is family dysfunction.
Okay.
And so those 3 categories, and there's 10 ACEs, and so I had all of them.
Yeah.
In my childhood, and I found in talking to other survivors of whether it's sex trafficking as an adult or sex trafficking as children, they have high ACEs. And so as we talk about what makes people vulnerable to trafficking and to being lured into that kind of situation, one of the big things is adverse childhood experiences. So divorce, any kind of abuse, instability in childhood, alcoholic parents, parents who have been arrested, parents who have mental illness. You know, you're growing up in those kind of environments where you have a chronic, slow and ongoing traumatic experiences. That makes people vulnerable to trafficking.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I like to really stress is that just because somebody's vulnerable doesn't mean they're going to go that way.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But when we see a kid who's acting out like I was, you know, with rages and all this other crazy behavior, and I say crazy like it was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
You know, I was stealing cars with other kids at 14, 15 years old. Like that's not normal.
That's pretty extreme, yeah.
Right, that's not normal behavior. You know, you're running away at 14 and sticking your thumb out, and I was thumbing to Boston just for something to do. That's not normal behavior. I had no regard for my life. I had attempted suicide numerous times. That's part of the reason that it was not a problem for me to die rather than have an abortion.
Yeah.
I was far more willing to die than to have an abortion because that meant I would die, but I wasn't going to kill another person.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I had no regard for my own life. And I think a lot of times we don't understand. We see that kid down the street. I was the kid you would never let your kids hang out with.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but somebody needs to reach out to that kid.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it, but that kid is more common than ever before.
Yeah.
Right? And part of that is we have all this violence on television and all this, you know, horrific porn. Porn is so bad.
Yeah. I was going to bring that up because they say a lot of like the human trafficking is part of the porn industry as well.
It is. And Pornhub right now is under a lot of pressure and a lot of heat. They're owned by MindGeek and Exodus Cry and I'm not going to say her name right, but Lauren Miette. Oh goodness, I should have written it down. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But so in the National Center on Sexual Exploitation is working to expose them. But a lot of young people on Pornhub are being sexually abused. And the buyers, they don't know. They're downloading all these rape scenes that are real. They're real. Yeah. And they think this is just exciting. No. This is terrible and terrifying. Yeah. And there's being suits brought by young people, young girls who have been trafficked on Pornhub. And their rapes have been uploaded. And they're very traumatized by that. So yeah, porn is a big part of it. And since we're talking about online stuff, there was no such thing. I mean, I've been out of my trafficking situation for almost 36 years now, and so there was no internet. There was none of that stuff. But now it's a really, really big magnet for young people to be drawn into maybe relationships where I was talking about that spider, just a subtle, like Ace was so subtle. He just came to my neighborhood and he was friendly with everybody and talked to everybody. I did not know I was his target. I had no idea. And a lot of times online, it's the same way. You get in group chats or friendly conversations with people you don't know. Yeah. And they have a profile pic of maybe they're saying they're a 14-year-old boy or a 16-year-old girl. You think they're one thing, but they're another thing. And I actually went, apps are changing all the time, but I went online and I looked at what is considered the top 12 most dangerous apps this year. Of course, Snapchat being the first, and Instagram. And for those of you who can see this is what they look like on your kid's phone. You can see that.
So I'm surprised about Instagram, actually. I know that's mostly images, but that's a pretty popular social media site.
Yes, it is, very much so, yeah. And for a while, it was Facebook was included, and I don't see them on this list now. Okay. There's newer ones, though, that I didn't know about, like Line, which is, it's a purchasing app, but there are ways to make the images that you're looking at disappear. They can stay for 2 minutes or 2 weeks, all the different things. So Line, and then Yellow, which is just I'm going to show you just a second. Yeah. The yellow square. And Yellow is like Tinder for kids.
Really?
Yeah, that's all it's about.
Disgusting.
It's Tinder for kids. It's an imaging app. It's been, is this the one? It allows strangers to talk with your kids. So you don't have to there's no privacy on this one. You're on it and anybody can talk to anybody.
Wow.
And it looks very innocuous. It's just a yellow square. And then Omegle. And Omegle is one that it's got a GPS to it. And it literally has a warning. Predators have been known to use this site. Wow. And so that's what these look like. Right, so Omegle is the last one, and then Yellow and Line. And then Kick, there was a young girl killed by a Kick user.
Oh my gosh.
A few years ago. He met her on Kick. They met up. Kick also has the GPS. And it's a chat app, and it's supposed to be, all my friends are on it kind of thing, and yet there are predators on there. Yeah. Down, which is also about hooking up. This is just for hooking up. That's what it's for. That's all it's used for. And then Blender is very similar. It's got a flirt and a meetup tag. So you can tag yourself as only to flirt, or you can tag yourself as wanting to meet up. And that's how predators can find them. And these are the apps. If you have these apps on your kids' phones, you make sure you talk with them. Yeah. And get them off. Whisper is another one. Whisper is, I think, probably the worst because it allows you to secretly chat with other people that it's supposedly not traceable.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it's a tool that's been used a lot for cyberbullying. So if your kid's been on maybe one of these other apps, they might get an invitation to whisper, and then they have private conversations, and then they're being bullied into things with anonymous people. These are anonymous, right? So it could be one of your friends is on one of these chat apps, and then you get an invitation to whisper, and now it turns into something really, really nasty.
Yeah.
And then Vaulty. And Vaulty, is that the one? I'm so sorry to not know this, but Vaulty hides images. It hides images from your phone. So if you so it's like a storage, but nobody could open it except how to find the folders. That's why it's called Vaulty. And so this is Whisper, and this is Vaulty. So Whisper is dangerous for your kids, and Vaulty is your kids are keeping something from you. So you want to watch that. And then there's another one called Vine. I don't know if you've heard of Vine.
I think I have.
It was kind of like a big
It was a thing a few years ago, wasn't it?
Short videos.
Yes.
So it's real short videos. And so that has, because it's the short, like 6-second videos or something, it supposedly goes away after.
Okay.
So that's how predators are exposing kids to porn. Their first introductions to porn.
Yeah.
Through this Vine app, because it's short and it goes away.
Yeah.
So the kid is like, by the time they catch their breath, even if they're going to go tell mom, it's gone.
Yeah.
Right? And they're getting kids younger and younger. And then Poof. And Poof will Poof will hide the icons of all these other apps.
What?
Yeah. So
who develops these things?
This is Vine up here, and Vine, like I said, was popular for a while. Like it had this big surge.
I remember that now. Yeah, the Vines. They were like these really short clips, and you could find. I always found them on YouTube. I didn't actually know that Vine was like its own app. I thought it was just like a GIF type of thing.
And then Poof is the one. If you find this on your kid's phone, they are hiding something.
Yeah, because they're intentionally not wanting you to see the other icons.
Right. And it's not that your kids are the bad kids either. Sometimes, all my friends have
peer
it.
Pressure,
my friend put it on my phone. I didn't even know what it was, and that could be very true. It could be as innocent as that my friends did it. And even if they did, they just don't know the danger. There's a few people trying to create videos for kids so that they'll kind of realize the danger, and I think some of the stories that we told them when they were little, like Little Red Riding Hood, are probably some of the best.
Right, yeah.
The best ways to say, not everybody is as they seem.
Yeah.
Little Red Riding Hood was about her going to see her grandmother and being swayed by the wolf, right? And that is kind of what happens out there.
Yeah.
And it's a very dangerous world that we live in.
And I think a lot of times, too, the kids will kind of recognize, there are things that can happen, but they're so young and innocent that they can't fully grasp what would happen, first of all. And then secondly, I think there's the idea that, well, if something like that happened to somebody else, it won't happen to me. Whereas they don't realize that, we're all really just a statistic. You know what I mean? Like, we're only one person away from being that number of someone that's had something happen to them,
Yeah.
But real quick, I am going to take a break and just go right into some of the sponsors that we have, and then we can kind of talk about what it was like, being a mom and mothering your children with the experiences that you had. And so real quick, we'll hear from Elated Canine. So Elated Canine Training and Pet Services, LLC is here for your family's pets needs. We work with all ages and breeds. We run day training in our home while you're at work, private lessons at your home, group lessons, and a few other tailor-made services. Please contact Jocelyn at 603-479-7253 or on our website at elatedcanine.com for more information. We can't wait to help both you and your pup find the happy, healthy relationship you're searching for. And there's a couple others, so I'll go right into them as well. There's clinical hypnotherapist Kaja Weglars. She offers personalized hypnotherapy programs designed specifically for you with your unique goals in mind. Release low vibration emotions from the past, overcome childhood traumas, and create a life that you love. Become a better mom, wife, and individual, and find your inner bliss through true self-love. Leave the past behind, overcome negative self-talk and unwanted habits, and become empowered. You can reach her at facebook.com/Kaja Weglar's Hypnotherapy, and that's spelled KASIAWEGLARZ Hypnotherapy. Or you can give her a call at 603-254-6716. And for our last sponsor, we have Allison Driscoll, who's a realtor with Keller Williams. Driven by community values and a passion for sustainability, Allison utilizes a holistic approach to make your home sale or purchase in New Hampshire a smooth and enjoyable process. Allison is a green designated realtor with Keller Williams Realty Metropolitan, with a broad knowledge base to help buyers and sellers of traditional single-family homes to rural homesteads and investment properties. You can find more information at allisondriscoll.kw.com and reach out to her at allisondriscoll@kw.com or 603-553-9932. So I know we wanted to talk about kind of what it was like being a mom. I know you had the 2 children before you met your husband, and then you guys ended up having 3 more together. Is that how that worked?
Yeah. Actually, I had the one, and she was 6 months old when we actually met.
Okay.
So he was involved in her life, as soon as she started recognizing people as people, basically. Yeah. And my second child, too, he was in the picture all the time. As I said, we were a little bit off and on, but my first child wouldn't have known that.
Yeah.
We were married or together as soon as my second was born. I really, really wanted to give them a different kind of life than I had. I really wanted it to be a lot different. And so I may have taken it even to the extreme where my toddler stepped on my toe and I said, "Oops, you stepped on my toe." She doesn't know. But I really spoke to her all the time with clarity, and of course when she was an infant it was baby talk, but as soon as she was toddling around, I spoke to her with a lot of clarity. I explained everything, probably to the point where she was annoying to other people because she wanted explanations on everything. Well, why can't I do that? And why do you want me to do this? And why is this? And I know most kids are why anyway, but she really required an explanation. She was speaking really clearly and well really early, so she was very linguistic anyway. And then I wanted that, and I say wanted it emphatically. That doesn't mean I gave it to them. They had their ACEs also. And I say adverse childhood experiences for them. I was ragey still. I was a rager. I got very angry and clean the house in a full-blown rage. My husband would say, "What's wrong with you?" He didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't know what was wrong with me, to be honest with you. I had suppressed everything and decided I wasn't going to look at that stuff. You mentioned the hypnotherapist. What was her name?
Kaja Weglar's.
Kaja Weglar's. All right. So
I've actually had her on the show quite a few times. So.
Okay. Okay. I guess I missed those.
I'll have to send you some of those videos then.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted that for them, but I didn't know how to do that for them. So they had a rough time with me as a mom. Even the rest of my children also until they were bigger. But I read every self-help book. Boy, I'll tell you what. I've given away more books than most people read in a lifetime. I read voraciously. I wanted to know how to be a good parent and a good leader, and I was a youth leader for a while too. Actually, for probably 25 years. For most of 25 years, I did something with youth. We had for 20 years, we had a camp that we taught teenagers. Every other week or so through the whole spring from February to June, and then we had a day camp in July, and I loved that. That was wonderful, and I taught them how to be responsible for the children, because it was basically a teen-led camp, and the campers were 8 to 12. 8 to 12. 4 to 12. I'm sorry, we had 2 camps. It was 4 to 8 and then 4 to 7 and 8 to 12. I'm getting a little off topic, but basically, being from where I came from, I wanted everything to go better for my kids, so I had them involved in all of those things.
Yeah.
And so there were other adults around, and there were other leaders around, and I parented kind of as group parenting.
Yeah.
You know, I homeschooled with a number of other families so that I could bounce things off them, and I grew by leaps and bounds. And that's not to say that, you know, my kids had it perfect ever.
Yeah.
But I really worked hard at being as educational as I could be, when really I wasn't as loving as I wanted to be. I don't know if that makes sense. I loved them by educating them.
Yeah.
You know, we were snuggly when they were babies and everything, and I got along with them all right, and we hug, etc. But not as much as I see some other families are really more affectionate, and you know, I love them, and I told them every day that I love them and stuff. But if I had any regrets, it would be that I didn't physically hug them more, that we didn't have that kind of, I think I was a little bit afraid of that physical connection when they got older, because it was so backwards for me. You know, my mom was very diligent, and she took care of us as a duty. You know, when I say that I didn't think anybody cared for other people until I was 18, I mean it was a duty. If you were family, to care for that person. It wasn't out of a I love you with all my heart kind of thing. And I did love my children, but I had that encapsulated heart. You know, I had to protect. Not that I wanted to, but that was just what happened. And so that was rough for them, and it was rough for me. You know, I didn't know how to deal with their temper tantrums. I didn't know how to.
I don't think any mom knows how to deal with that.
Well, with my first two children particularly, I think I wanted them to comply so that they would have a good life. Because I felt like when I didn't comply, it was very, very bad for us. As I mentioned earlier in the show, it got more and more violent. You know, I must have opened my mouth one time. And I cannot still to this day remember this, but my sister walked into the barn, and my biological father had a sickle around my neck stuck into the wall. And I was standing there against the wall, unable to move.
Oh my God.
Because I had spoken up and I had said something I wasn't supposed to say. So I think that those early childhood experiences kind of carried through to a fear that, you know, I would do something terrible to my children. So I kind of wanted them to be in line, and I wanted to be kind of a little bit more at arm's length. You know? And, of course, we outgrew that. Right? I mean, we did. We had lots of people around us, and I learned how to navigate those situations and cope with those things. And I provided home education for all of my children and some of their friends through high school. And they were, you know, and they were making decisions that, you know, my son, for example, my third child, says he was too young to make. He says, I shouldn't have chosen my own curriculum. But, you know, there were other kids around them, and he had to do 2 math, for example. And so he chose which math he wanted to do. He didn't want to do algebra. And I thought that I was doing the best by him by allowing him to make that decision. Well, as it turned out, he ended up having to go to college for algebra, and he was mad at me for a long time.
Oh, no.
Because it cost a lot of money to do college algebra as opposed to high school algebra. But I bought 3 different curriculum for him, and he didn't like any of them. So I really tried. And I think, you know, as moms, don't we really try? You know, we really try. And when we fail like that, you know, we can feel really bad about ourselves. But, you know, they grew up anyway. And made it.
Yes. And even the simple things. So this just happened to me a few days ago. I took my daughters to the park, and it was my first time bringing both of them out. And so my daughter's 2, and then I have a newborn daughter as well. So it's like we ended up walking because I didn't have a car at the time. So we walked to the park. It was a 1.5 mile walk, you know, with the double stroller. And so we get there, and then I have a 2-year-old who does, you know, doesn't know how to like not kill herself. So she's like trying to run into the lake, trying to run like into the parking lot, you know, and the whole time I'm stopping her and she's throwing a tantrum. I felt so guilty thinking like I ruined her day, like she was at the park, like, you know what I mean? Because she was so upset every time I would stop her. But what was I going to do? Let her run into those things? You can't do that. Yeah. And then later that night, we were laying in bed because we co-sleep. So we were all in the same bed together and we're like laying there and, you know, and she's looking at me and she was telling me all about the park. She was like, the water and the ducks and the friends. And I was like, she did have a good day. You know what I mean? And I think as moms, we get so down on ourselves, like, maybe I should have done this differently or I should have done this differently. When in reality, most kids just look back on it and say, you know, that was a lot of fun. Like, you know? Yeah.
My mom has apologized to me a million times, you know. And one of the big things that I remember about her was she would read to us. Yeah. We had a fantastic, I mean, really great vocabulary. Yeah. I went to first grade and I said, well, because the teacher would say, what do you do to stay warm? And well, you can wear several layers of clothing. And all of those kids made fun of me because it was 7 layers of clothing. They didn't even know the word several. Oh, wow. Right? 7 layers of clothing, that's ridiculous. And of course, I'm sitting there going, okay. Yeah, what's ridiculous? It's not ridiculous. Yeah. It doesn't mean 7, it means several. It means more than one. You know? Right, yeah. And of course they didn't know. But I remember a lot of good things, even though, you know, there were hard stuff. Yeah. There was. And so as moms, you're right, we're really too hard on ourselves about a lot of things. But there are things that, you know, we have to be super careful about these days, as I showed you. And the apps, you know, the apps, those are really important things for us to be aware of. You mentioned something a minute ago. You said that the kids don't have a clue what that danger really is. At 14, being passed around as a sexual object to many, many men, I had no idea. Even though I was hospitalized with gonorrhea, it was so bad. Oh my gosh, yeah. I could have had HIV. You know, I was tested for that a lot of times. Later in life, you know, I had, when my first daughter was born, I had 3 units of blood. And that was when HIV was like at the top, but you know, of everybody's mind. Yeah. And so I was tested a lot. But those kinds of things didn't really come into my mind. And if they did, it wasn't a big deal for me. Like, if they could kill you, well, okay, so what? Yeah. It wasn't, but you could be in pain for the rest of your life. That is something you can't conceive of as a child. Yeah. You can't. You know, I was just on the way over here, I was feeling a little achy, and I thought, well, I never knew when I was a kid what the abuses that I was putting my body through and other people were putting my body through, because I lived on the streets for that 4 years. Yeah. I was in and out of foster care a little bit, but I didn't stay very long. And I was home sometimes, but they didn't want me. I have my DCYF records, and they redacted the comments and the people who said, we don't want her here. I don't know who said it. Wow. I don't know who made those comments. My mom lived with her 2 brothers and my grandmother at the time. So could have been any of them. Could have even been my little sister, for all I know. I don't know who made those comments. And I didn't take care of myself. I didn't know how to take care of myself. You know, I literally spent weeks outside sometimes without any place to lay my head. Yeah. You know, I'd curl up in the back of a person's house or whatever. Sometimes I'd sleep in a car. You know, there were many days, many times that I would go 3, 4, 5, 6 days without eating anything. Maybe have some water, sometimes not even for a couple days. Like, I was sickly and very small, and that men wanted me very small. When I got to be 16, 17 years old, I was too old for some men to buy. Wow. And I'm still small. Yeah, yeah. And I still look young. I'm thinking about how young I must have looked. I have no photos. But I had a photo of myself at 12, and I looked like I was 9. Yeah. You know, I was very young looking. That runs in my family. And so I can't imagine being too old at 16 years old for that. you
Yeah.
know? And that terrifies me because that was so long ago.
Yeah.
And now, when we talk about porn, they don't see your grandfather's porn anymore.
Yeah.
This is some wicked, wicked stuff.
Yeah.
This is so violent.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done a little bit of study on how the brain reacts to porn and
Mm-hmm.
how when you're growing and you're little, you think about that. As moms, we think about that. As a small child, they want new experiences. They get bored with their toys, whatever. We think about that.
Yeah.
We know that the next school year they're going to learn more of what they learned last year, but differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
But porn is very much the same way. There's a novelty element to it that is almost a craving when you get to where you're watching porn.
Mm.
And prostitution is very similar. And I think, when I spoke to the legislators a couple times about prostitution, I said, you think it's sex.
Mm.
You think prostitution is about sex. That a man and a woman are kissing and having sex in a bed. That is often not the case.
Yeah.
It's often that buyer wants to do things with that prostituted person that they cannot do with their girlfriend or boyfriend or wife or husband.
Mm.
They can't do it to them. So
Yeah.
they do it to the person who's being prostituted. I'm paying you. I'm going to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
I'm going to slap you around. I'm going to put things in places where you don't want them because I'm paying you, and that's it.
Mm.
And especially if that prostituted person has a pimp.
Yeah.
It's very wicked. But as a mom, watching my children grow, I had all those thoughts in my mind.
Yeah.
I want to protect them from everything.
Oh, yeah.
So my grown kids will tell you they weren't allowed to watch commercials.
Yeah.
I would literally shut the television off and they didn't watch the commercials for the shows that they watched.
Yeah.
I had what was called a Sky Angel.
Mm.
Have you ever heard of that?
No, what is that?
It was 100% Christian television on satellite.
Oh.
We didn't even have regular TV in our house.
Yeah.
We had a Sky Angel.
Yeah.
And we were at church all the time in homeschool groups.
Yeah.
And we had Christian music playing and we went to
Yeah.
Christian concerts. And I kept them away from all that I felt would be, I don't want to use the word secular because we did secular things, but all the things that I felt like might be risky.
Mm. Yeah.
And then there was a boy in church who wanted to do things to my 12-year-old daughter. He was only 16, but I was like, no way.
Yeah. Like, that's
You know,
not happening.
That's not happening. And I
Yeah.
found other abuses were happening in our church, in our little youth group.
Wow.
My daughter fell on the ice, and she had a big split lip and her blood flowing all over. And it wasn't until 2 years later that I found out that one of those boys pushed her down because she wasn't doing what he wanted her to do.
Wow.
Smashed her face, but she wanted to be in with the crowd because we didn't have all the school friends that you can pick different groups. We had these friends.
Yeah.
We had these church friends, you know.
Yeah.
And so she felt like that was her, she was kind of locked in there.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing that, we as parents, we want to protect our children, but we don't always know where those traps are, where those hurts are going to be found, And then I feel that in bringing them up that way, I put off my own healing for a long time too, And I had to do that because I was focused on them.
Yeah.
But then, when it was time for my healing, I was such a wreck.
Yeah.
I was such a wreck, for quite a long time. But I tried really hard not to put any of that on them, not to let them see that,
Yeah.
And now that they're adults, they know a lot of it. My youngest actually did some security work for me when I did pro-life stuff.
Oh, yeah.
When it was dangerous. So, when Obama was in, there was a lot of, I can't remember what year exactly, but there was one year in particular that there was just a lot of pro-life angst, I guess you'd call it. You know, there was a lot of clashes between, you know, people. And so when I would have an event, or I went up to Canada and I spoke for a rally up there for March for Life, my son went with me, and he was my security. You know? He eventually went into the Air Force, so he's still that guy.
Yeah.
You know, he taught self-defense for a while and stuff. Yeah. And so I think that even though I was not that, you know, great mom I wanted to be, my kids are great kids. You know, they're great people. They're all wonderful people. So my son, my youngest, has a child, and he's married, and he's out out west because he was in the Air Force. He's just gotten out. And they have one, and then my oldest has one. He's the youngest grandchild, which I get to take care of.
Aww.
Yes, I get to sing to him and rock him and then give him back.
Yeah, exactly. Give him chocolate and then give him back. Yeah.
Well, he's not yet, but yes. And then I have two in North Carolina, and of course they're on my heart night and day and night, all the time. And I'm always thinking about them. I try to FaceTime them as often as I can. And always telling them, you know, be careful, there's people, you know. And I don't want to scare them, but I do. Yeah. I don't tell them the terrible things that could happen to them, but I do tell them that there are people that would try to hurt them if they had a chance, you know.
Yeah.
And I think as moms, we do need to do that as age appropriate.
Yeah.
And let them know, because these remote learning that they're doing now, they're on the computer all the time.
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily know who's on the other side.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you saw how many legislative hearings, when we first went on the Zoom legislative hearings, got hacked.
Yeah. There were a lot of them where there was a lot of weird glitches is what I was hearing. And so I didn't hear too much about the hacked. So how did that work?
So there were a few times that people got on to their I don't think it was in New Hampshire.
Okay.
But there were a couple of times that I saw that people actually got on and were able to get in front of they put their own camera in front of the Zoom camera for whoever was supposed to be speaking. Yeah.
Wow.
And so you don't necessarily know who can do that, who's smart enough to do that. And then you've got COVID also, meaning people are home.
Oh,
so they've got all kinds of time to learn all kinds of new things. And we've got people who are already hacking into all kinds of things. That's what they do. You know, stealing identities, etc.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I also saw something in the news about those nanny cams. There's people hack into those all the time, and they can see what's happening in your house.
Right.
Which is the creepiest thing to me.
Very, very creepy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of creeps out there.
Yeah, the technology definitely creates new opportunity for that.
Yeah. But thank God there are people like you, good people, who
you.
genuinely care about other people. Even just, you know, and I don't want to use the word, I don't mean to use the word just, but somebody who's at home taking care of her two babies feels like she's not doing enough because she's not reaching out to other people, but she's got two young kids that she's bringing up that are going to, maybe one mom, stay-at-home mom with one child, feels like she's not doing enough, but she's bringing up another person who's going to be able to go out into the world one day. And her being able to equip that little person, it's going to mean the world to that little person.
Yeah.
And then that little person might go and change, well, they will go and change their world.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to see that because the days are long.
Yeah.
When you're a mom, especially a stay-at-home mom, the days are long.
Yeah.
But the years are short.
Yeah.
They really are. You know, my youngest is going to be 24 years old.
Yeah.
My baby.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? So fast.
Yeah.
You know, it's so fast. And it seems like time even speeds up. The youngest grandchild is now, he's going to be 6 months old in a couple days.
Yeah.
It feels like yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they weren't letting people in the hospital unless it was a doula. So my son-in-law said, hey, are you a doula? Like, no.
I can be, though.
I did. I got that certificate.
Did you really?
I sure did.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah, I sure did. Yep.
Oh, that's amazing. That's the kind of moms that we need in this world. I know. I actually my newborn. She's now like a little over a month. See, I keep calling her newborn because I can't fathom that it's been that long already.
Mm-hmm.
But we opted to do a home birth because I mean, just all the different COVID protocols that are in the hospitals.
Yeah.
I was like, we're not doing that. We'll do this at home. So that's what we did, and
Wow.
I got to give birth to her right in my living room with my midwife team and my husband and my 2-year-old right next to me, and
Wow.
it was amazing.
That's
you
cool.
know,
Yeah.
it's just, the whole hospital experience I realized was very overrated. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing like giving birth at home.
Well, my daughter that child was not coming out.
Yeah.
She was very, very, very sick. And he
yeah.
was not even close to coming out. I mean, when they did a section,
Mm-hmm.
when they did the section, they had to wrestle him out.
Oh my God.
So I was very grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it happens like that because we actually planned a home birth with my first daughter, and then we got transferred to hospital. Sometimes you can't avoid it.
Yeah.
But
thank God for hospitals. We're very grateful.
Yes.
We're very grateful for the medical communities.
Oh, yeah. Well, everything has its place, absolutely. So, but I did also want to talk a little bit about the risks and prevention. I know we talked about it a little bit before, but you were talking about how they kind of come in like a spider and weave the webs, and it's oftentimes somebody that comes in and gains the trust of the family.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that moms can kind of look out for or that might kind of send a red flag for them?
Yeah, I think if your child is receiving gifts from someone, you want to make sure that you're monitoring that relationship really closely.
Yeah.
And then there are just times when you just aren't going to be able to spy. They're so crafty and so good at lying that you're just not. And if you find yourself in that situation, you're going to have to forgive yourself and do your best to heal and help your child to heal and move forward. But as far as the risk, is your child, do they act a little differently sometimes when they come home from being in that person's presence?
Yeah.
Are they receiving, as I said, gifts? Do they talk about having secrets? In my house, we didn't have secrets. We had surprises. And I felt like that was really important because I had been taught that a secret is a secret forever. And if you can keep a secret as a child, you are vulnerable.
Yeah.
But if you are keeping a surprise that's going to be revealed.
Oh, that's cute. I like that.
Right? It's a whole different concept for a child. This is going to be revealed. We have a surprise.
Yeah.
It's going to be revealed to the person that it's to be revealed to, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And so when we have a surprise birthday party or something like that, we have a present for someone, it was never a secret in my house. It was always a surprise. And I think that's really important for parents as far as prevention goes.
Yeah.
To talk to your kids about having secrets versus surprises. Secrets are not okay.
Yeah.
Surprises are what we want. And surprises are awesome.
Yeah.
But secrets are not.
Yeah.
And then, as I said, gaining that child's trust and gaining the family's trust is, we do have to trust people.
Yeah.
We really do. So if
yeah, exactly.
you can't just not trust anyone. As I said, I was in a tight-knit community. We had, maybe a dozen families that were very close, and I found that there was some bad stuff that went on from some of the other teenagers in that group. But it doesn't mean you stop trusting altogether.
Yeah.
You just try to develop better relationships, and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we can only do our best, and we are living in a rough world right now. This is a rough time. We've got tremendous government overreach. Especially with the mask thing. Like these are dehumanizing and control measures that I don't think we're ever really fully going to come back from unless we as a people really rise up and say, no, I don't know that we can do it. I really don't. I mentioned a few times that I had gone to church, and church was a big part of our life. And I've done a lot of studying. I became an ordained minister years and years ago so that I could do youth ministry. And so I did a lot of study. And there's a lot in the Revelation about how things are going to go down.
Yeah.
And they're not really clear.
Yeah.
You know, and some of it's a little bit scary, and some of it's a little bit like, how in the world would that happen? And then other things are like, oh, I see that.
Yeah.
You know, and so when we come up to these kinds of things, I think it's really important to instill that faith that there's not only a creator that loves us no matter what,
Mm-hmm.
whether we're behaving or we're not behaving,
Yeah.
whether it's our birthday or it's not our birthday.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, no matter what, our creator loves us because he made us.
Mm.
And having that hope of an eternal life after this life.
Mm.
Can I understand and tell you why we are living this life right now?
Yeah.
Why we live in a fallen world? No.
Yeah.
No, I don't get it. I don't get it at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I do trust. And the funny thing is that if I'm wrong, I die like a dog, like they say.
Yeah.
I lose nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
But if I'm right, I get to go and live in heaven with God forever, where there's no tears and no pain.
Yeah.
And there's something hopeful about that.
Yeah.
You know, because can we absolutely, emphatically, 100% all the time totally believe that there's no way we're wrong? I don't know. Maybe some people can.
Yeah.
I have faulty faith sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
But when we instill that faith in ourselves and in our children, to know that this world is broken, it's terribly, terribly broken, but there's another world to come. And that in that world, there is safety, and it's light all the time. There's no darkness there. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
There's no darkness.
Yeah.
You know, most of the abuse that I suffered was in the dark. And there was a barn on my grandmother's property, and there was an upstairs room, and it wasn't necessarily literally dark, but it was very dark feeling. You know, it was very dark. And so when our kids go through rough stuff, for them to have that faith that there's a better world ahead, and even just the fact that if we trust in God, we're going to behave better.
Yeah.
You know, the scripture says, be kind, tender-hearted, forgiving one another.
Yeah.
You know, love one another. You know, that the fruit of the Spirit is peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Like those things. And we're instilling those things, not only in our children, but knowing that there are other people to whom they can rely on for those things.
Yeah.
I think really, really helps as a preventative measure to be able to trust in those things.
Yeah.
And I know probably some people would be able to tell you more preventative measures than to trust in, you know, goodness. But I don't know that there are a whole lot more that you wouldn't already do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I agree 100%. I agree. I was, when I was driving over here, I was listening to K-Love. I don't know if you're familiar with that radio station. I love it. And they were kind of talking about that, actually, which was interesting, which was just the concept of, you know, when we're doing better, we kind of make like a ripple effect to those around us as well.
Yeah.
You know, and it's, I see that all the time, you know, anytime you're being a good person, that does have an effect on others. And sometimes you don't see it till later. You know, I've had people reach out to me that are like, you know, you said this, you know, months ago, and it's been lingering, and then I just decided to go for it and do it. And I'm like, wow, like I totally forgot I even said that, you know? So it's like when we do these things, it absolutely does have an effect on so many people. And just having the courage to go out and talk about what's important to you and to try to help people, I think is super important too. I think some people feel like, I'm just a little person, what can I do? But, you know, like you were saying, if there's that rowdy kid on the street, someone has to reach out to them, you know, and find out if they're okay, because odds are they're not, you know, and odds are probably not a whole lot of people are reaching out to them.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, that brings me to one more thing. So, you know, a lot of times people are like, well, what can we do about that trafficking victim? What if we see them on the streets? Call the tip line.
Yeah.
Don't approach them, because you don't know who's watching. And that could be very dangerous for both of you.
Okay.
Right? So you would never approach someone you think is a trafficking victim.
Okay.
Call the tip line. It's 888-3737-888. Or call your local police department and tell them. They're going to be a lot faster.
Yeah.
If you call 888-3737-888,
Mm-hmm.
it could take 24, 48 hours for them to get someone here on the ground
Yeah.
to go and investigate. But you could call your local police department and say, hey, there's something suspicious happening here. I'm really concerned. It could be domestic violence. It could be trafficking. I'm not sure. You don't have to have all the answers.
Yeah.
But it can be really dangerous depending on where you are. I live in a really rural place, but I still wouldn't put it past anybody to be in a gang in that area.
Yeah.
And then when you're talking about Manchester and Nashua and the Portsmouth and the bigger cities, you've got to be really careful.
Yeah.
There are very, very dangerous people in this world.
Yeah.
Very dangerous people. So you would not want to approach them. But if your kid's 12 or 13 going to school, and there's this kid in their class, and you're at a function, they still have functions.
Maybe next year, right? Who knows?
Right.
Yeah.
Obviously not now, but soon when we have kids in gathering again, hopefully.
Yeah.
And you see that kid, say, hey, what about that kid over there? Do you know that kid? And ask your child. Do they know them? Maybe they don't even know them.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody else knows them. What's the deal with that kid? Do they have any friends? You can inquire as a person.
Yeah.
And obviously you don't want to do it in too creepy a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that we all need people. I think of it as, I'm going to come back to the cross again, come back to God. And we have the cross as our representation of Christianity. Whether you're Catholic or Protestant, a lot of denominations use a cross, right?
Yeah.
Most of the Protestant denominations don't have Jesus on the cross anymore, but they still use a cross. And so I think of that as this is the vertical, is our relationship with God. He gave us that vertical to remind us that we need to have that relationship with God, but he also gave us the horizontal. That we're supposed to have relationship with other people, and I'm probably blocking my face here. We have that relationship with other people across the board. We're supposed to love one another no matter what.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean we condone sin and we celebrate sin and all that stuff, but we still love the person.
Yeah.
No matter what they're involved with. And I'm not saying you give them a free ride. If they're committing crimes, like a trafficker, for example, a buyer,
they need to be held accountable.
They need to be held accountable, of course, but we don't have to treat them badly. We still want to be a decent person, decent human being to them. I was in the town hall before COVID.
Yeah.
And this older gentleman was sweeping the floor, and I was walking past him, and somehow I didn't see him until I got to in his way.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, excuse me, sir." And the guy next to me goes, "Sir, he's the janitor." And I went, "So?"
Yeah. Wow.
Really? Does he have a station? You don't have any idea what that older gentleman has done in his life.
Yeah, exactly.
He could have saved a whole platoon of people on some, mission or something.
Yeah,
You don't know.
Yeah.
What he's gone through, what he's been through. He's a person.
Yeah.
And we need to treat people decently. And I've brought my kids up to be like that, and they do. They're just wonderful people. And I'm very, very grateful to have had the opportunity to be a mom. Yes, do I have regrets? Of course. We will always do.
Yeah.
But I get grandchildren too.
Yeah. Oh, that's so sweet. I just love it. I think one of the most extraordinary things is how you've been able to kind of turn that around. The life that you had growing up and the experiences that you went through, and being able to turn that around and say, that's going to end now, and it's not going to happen to my children, and my children get to kind of create their own life. They're not going to be burdened with childhood trauma.
Well, as much as I could help it, yeah.
And that's part of everybody too. I mean, nobody comes out of this world alive, right? That's the saying. So you can't do everything perfectly, but at least to the best of your ability. And I mean, it sounds like you did a great job. So
Well, as I said, my mom was married for a few years to a relatively normal household.
Yeah.
So there was that.
Yeah. So, and actually, it just popped into my brain, another question. How did your family respond when you kind of came out with your stories of what had happened to you?
I have not had any contact with my biological father's family since I was about 19 years old. So I didn't come out to them. At all.
Yeah.
My sister did confront my biological father, asked me if I wanted to go. Don't have any reason, don't want to.
Yeah.
No, thank you. But my mom, as I said, she's just apologized so many times. When I used to let her hear me speak, and now I tell her, I'm going to post this, don't listen to it.
Yeah.
Because it just hurts her and it's not necessary.
Yeah.
But, she would cry and cry. I didn't know it was that. I'm like, because that day when she came home, she was angry with me. And rightly so, honestly.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
But so there was that. But my kids learned in dribs and drabs over the years. I did write a book. I didn't know the words for it. It's funny, I had just published the book before that seminar that I was telling you about. And that conference, when that woman was up on stage basically describing my life, I went right home at the lunch break, I think, and I brought the book back and I gave her a copy of it.
Really?
Yes, I did. I brought it right to her and I said, I can't believe you were talking about me. There's not a word of trafficking in it. It was basically just my memoir. I wrote it in 3 parts. I called the first part the setup. This is the world that I was born into. There was the do what thou wilt music all the time, the Beatles and all of the rock and roll and all of the LSD and all of the drugs and everything just starting out. And then, what happened in my family, my biological father was a draft dodger, and he would leave. And that was part of the reason my mom stayed so long, was because he wasn't there attacking her all the time. He was gone. And he would come back and attack her and then leave again. And so it wasn't, as I said, till she was pregnant the second time before she got away from him.
Yeah.
But so then I talk about my whole story. And then the last part of it is just a devotional. Just this, these are the scriptures that I relied on to come out of that whole situation and to be able to be a mom and a wife and a person that you could rely on, for example. I don't know if Gary told you, but I was on the board of New Hampshire Right to Life for a dozen years or so. I was president. I was chair of the Educational Trust. I was chair of the Political Action Committee. I did all those different roles in there. And then at that time, I was just really also homeschooling my kids. So I had a lot of responsibilities and learning all of those new ways of behaving, where as a teenager I had no responsibilities to anyone, no accountability whatsoever. It really was a whole different lifestyle. And I don't know where I was going with that. I apologize.
That's okay. And your sister, did she end up having any of those similar experiences? I mean, obviously with your father, but I mean...
Right. So she was not, as far as she knows, trafficked for sex the way that I was, but she was very abused. She used a lot of alcohol. She was used and abused that way through her teenage years. She had difficulty with relationships. She's been married now for a little while. She does have 2 children. Both were Marines. One's still in the Marines and the other one's out. And so she had a really rough time also. She did a lot of work to become a life coach, and now at this point in time she's training rescue dogs.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, very cool.
And what do you think it was that had both of you guys have? I mean, in some ways it was similar, how, I guess the path that you both took, but obviously you ended up in the sex trafficking, whereas she wasn't really.
She went to live with my grandmother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's just, I guess, the environment, really.
For her, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to mention while we have you here on the show?
I think we covered a lot
Yeah,
of ground.
we did. That's why I'm like, just wanted to let you have the opportunity.
I think we covered a real lot of ground, a lot of risk factors. We talked about the apps and the online stuff, which I thought was really important for today's people, you know.
Yeah.
And I thank you for all that you do here, you know, illuminating motherhood, you know, bringing light to motherhood and all the things and that we face as moms, and there, you know, there's no end to it. You know, all of our kids are different, all of our circumstances are different, you know, so I just thank you so much for all that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being on the show. And how can people find your book, by the way, if anybody's interested? Is it still being sold?
It is. I have a website called thedarlingprincess.com. It's not, so Darling Princess is not a thing. There's some really risque looking darling princesses, but not me. It's thedarlingprincess.com. And my books are on there. It's on the left-hand side. It says books. So I actually wrote a couple of chapters in a personhood book also. And I have books that are not finished.
Yeah.
That are not there yet.
Yeah.
But hopefully soon.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to keep an eye out for them. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.